In the 1960s, the miracle of jet travel opened up a whole world to people with disposable income, which in those days meant Americans. Bruce Brown, a passionate surfer and filmmaker, had the great idea to send two young surfers around the world on a mission to find the best waves. The film he put together became a viral sensation 50 years before Gangnam Style and Mr. Beast. The Endless Summer, with its dry humor and enthusiastic exploration of a huge swath of the Southern Hemisphere, is a snapshot of a bygone time. We wondered if it still had the power to entertain in today's rich ecosystem of content, so we mixed up some surfer on acid cocktails and put on our suits for a jet travel trip to the 60s. It's time for episode 90 of Toasting the Classics, The Endless Summer. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, a podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we drink something inspired by the classic while we talk about it. We are back to the normal rotation today. We've got Dave McArthur and
Professor Clint Lanier.
Professor Clint Lanier, yes, yeah. the proper starting rotation for Toasting the Classics is here today.
That's right. My apologies for being gone. I had COVID.
That's a good reason.
Yeah,
I think that's a good reason. The disease that made Zoom possible, and
that's true.
Our podcast when we're living on different parts.
That's a good point. We owe a lot to that little beastie. Yes,
we do. So it was up to you to choose a movie this time. What'd you go with?
I chose one of my favorite movies of all time. It's called The Endless Summer. I figure we haven't. Have we had a documentary?
Oh boy, it sure seems like we have. We talked about doing this one a long time ago.
Yeah,
and then we tabled it for some reason. I don't know if we have done a documentary. I mean, Red Dawn. That's kind of a documentary from John Milius' perspective.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot that are, we want our lives to follow. But this is
right.
So this is a documentary. It was released in 1964 by filmmaker Bruce Brown, who was a surfing enthusiast. And I guess you would say he was he was an amateur, like videographer. He started with 8mm film. And so he would start taking videos of people surfing, and he kind of put it all together, and he made this silent black and white film.
It sounded like the first 8mm surfing film he did was literally because he was surfing at a time when people weren't surfing.
Yes.
And he wanted to explain to his mother what it was he was spending his days doing. So he took videos of everybody surfing. And also because he hated the beach blanket bingo movies.
Right.
And I guess that perception. And that's Funicello and whatever.
Yeah, right.
And what that did for the perception of surfing. So he decided to show what was actually happening.
Right. And so the guy was super passionate about surfing, and also just sort of a budding, like I said, film hobbyist, I guess, video hobbyist. And they went on a round the world trip stemming from Los Angeles to Senegal, I think what used to be called Dakar, and then Lagos, Nigeria.
Dakar's the city. Dakar's the city where
Dakar. Yeah, Dakar. I'm sorry, in Senegal, Lagos, and then South Africa.
They were in Ghana.
Oh, Ghana. Yeah, Ghana.
They went to Dakar, Senegal. They went to outside of Accra, Ghana, and then down to Cape Town. Did they go to Nigeria?
I thought they went to Lagos.
I think they did. I think they did go to Lagos. That's right.
Yeah.
And then to Cape Town. Right.
Yeah, and then to Cape Town, and then Australia, New Zealand, Tahiti, Hawaii, and then back to the States. And it was the idea of it is you're following summer around the world, which is a cool idea, right? So it's the endless summer. That's what surfers all dream about, is basically one stretch of a year when the waves are all perfect, the water is warm, and they can just go surfing every day. And so they were chasing this summer kind of, around the world. Two of his friends, two surfers, to be, I guess, his protagonists. And he followed them around, and he filmed them surfing, and he filmed them on these different locations, which at the time would have been exotic. It's still pretty exotic today. These aren't places that people typically go. So there's this kind of romantic, exotic locationality, I guess.
I think one of the cool things about it is that this idea seems like it would have occurred to people long before this happened.
Yeah.
I think the reason why it happened this way is because this is the first time in history where there's jet travel for regular people. Because in the 50s even, I remember my friend's dad was at NATO, working for NATO during the 1950s, and he was telling us how when he would fly to Europe in the 50s, there weren't jets yet. So you had to take a propeller plane and you had to do these hops all the way across the North Atlantic to places like Greenland along the way because you couldn't go that far. So I think international travel I think we don't even understand how much easier it was in 1964 than it had been before that. Like it's a big difference. It's a big difference in how easily you can get around. People were still taking ships in the 40s and 50s to go across the Atlantic.
Right, right. My mom went to Hawaii in 1964, and she actually did take a prop plane. It was like it had, I think, 4 propellers, but it was a big prop plane. It wasn't a jet. Did they go over they must have, they went over the Atlantic, because I think they left out of New York, I think, or something like that.
They went to New York, and then from New York to Dakar, and it looked like it was a straight shot. And I don't think you could have done that in the 40s.
In a prop plane, not in a prop plane at all. But it was released. He came back. He did a lot of work to it that I didn't know about, and released it in 1964. And it was a total homegrown bootstrap project. He basically made some other films to fund this film. Was able to scrape together 50 grand, which in 50,000 in 19. It would have been 62 or 61 when he
That's a lot of money.
Made it. It's a lot of money, but came back, found a distributor, and it grossed 5 million domestically.
It's a lot for them.
20 million globally, and I think it's just made a ton of money since then. I mean, it's such a classic. I stream it off of Amazon. It's on Prime, but I own the movie as well. I've been watching this movie for years. It's such a great movie because it has all of the things that when I was a kid, National Geographic was one of the coolest things in the world, because in the 70s, National Geographic would show you all these great exotic places. And I loved watching these Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And, and it was all about this exotic, locality. And this was made 10 years before I was born, but it was, it still sort of it brings back that feel. Like you watch it and you're watching, what Africa looked like back then. And, oh, that's so cool. What these different countries rather in Africa look like. And that's so neat and so exotic and so cool. And I'm still like that with the South Pacific stuff,
The South Pacific stuff, that's really dope. But the Africa stuff is really interesting to me, because I think Latin America and Africa in the middle of the 20th century were still really rural and like not that many people, right? It wasn't until the second half of the 20th century you get like the big boom and populations in places like Lagos and all over sub-Saharan Africa. And it's like a video of a time that's gone. Africa's gone. You go to that place now, there's a shanty town with 200,000 people right off the beach and piles of garbage everywhere and stuff, and all these problems that come from sort of runaway population growth in that part of the world. So it's very different. It's a very different experience. For sure. But viewing experience. To see what it was like then.
That's the cool thing about documentaries, is it does sort of freeze a moment in time. And it shows you like, this is what it looked like then. And some of them are put-ons. I mean, what was the famous one? Nanook of the North or whatever that stupid
apparently Disney that one was fake, right?
And that was all, it's all staged. You have Inuit people, but they're made to be like all, they're like, we don't live like that, but he's got them in snow houses and all this BS.
I had that feeling watching this. I was like, how much of this is legit, right? And so I watched some interviews about the making of it, and there's definitely, to some extent, for instance, going to South Africa, there were definitely people surfing in South Africa all over, and they meet the people that surf there in the movie. So that it's not like they say they aren't. But that place, Cape St. Francis, they knew that was a good surfing spot. The whole plan of the trip originally was to fly directly to South Africa.
Just to go there, just to go there.
St. Francis, exactly. So they kind of made it sound like they just walked out to the beach and discovered this amazing place in South Africa. That's a little bit fake, but they talked about the experience of being in Ghana and meeting the kids on the beach, and it sounded like that was just 100% what happened. They just took the boards out, started talking to all these kids, and the kids were really into it. And it's part of my biggest surprise for later, but I watched an interview that had a lot to do with that visit.
Yeah, there are certain things that are definitely cooked.
Hey, what are we drinking?
Okay, so what are we drinking? We're drinking a classic drink, and I mean classic, all the way from the early 90s.
Oh, okay.
Created in the early 90s, and it's called Surfer on Acid. Is that what it's called?
Surfer on Acid. That was the link you sent me. That's what I made.
So it's Surfer on Acid.
Have you heard kids start referring to it as the 1900s yet? Because I've started to hear that, and it's upsetting. People are like, this was what people did back in the 1900s, and I'm like,
they use that as a pejorative. So
okay, just to like get me.
Totally. So this is made with, it's just equal parts. I'm going to probably use a little bit more than the recipe calls for, but it's 1 ounce coconut rum, 1 ounce Jägermeister, which is big in the 90s, and then 1 ounce of pineapple juice. So
more than once in my life, I have sworn I'm never drinking Jägermeister again. and yet, once every 10 years or so, it crops back up in my life.
There's a throwaway line in The Hangover they all take a shot of Jaeger before the night kind of like
Oh, okay.
melts down. But there's that shot when they all take the shot, this
Hmm.
throwaway line. So like, oh God, it tastes like college.
Yeah.
And if you've said that, then you can kind of tell when somebody went to college if they say something similar.
Yep.
For us,
Yep.
it was like nowadays it's that cinnamon whiskey stuff. What
Oh
is it?
yeah, Fireball.
Fireball. Yeah. Today it's Fireball. Back then it was Jaeger.
You know what I
Uh,
discovered though, because they don't allow sales of hard liquor at convenience stores and things in New York, right?
okay.
And yet they have this plat of Fireball by the door. And I asked the guy, I was like,
Yeah,
"Why? Why do
it's
you
a
have
malt. Yeah,
Fireball?"
they make
And
a
it turns
malt
out, yeah,
liquor.
it's just a malt
Yeah,
liquor. It's not a
yeah,
whiskey at all. Everybody calls it a whiskey, but it totally thought that was just a
yeah.
cinnamon shot of
They
whiskey.
were actually sued. And as a
Oh,
lawyer, it's
that's
something
right.
you could
That's right.
appreciate. They were sued because they didn't let on about that.
Yeah.
They sell it as if it's the regular stuff without. And I looked the last time I was somewhere. I looked, and you have to look at the fine print, and it says malt liquor like
It
twelve
does.
percent
Yeah.
or something
Yep.
like that. I've never had this. So I'm trying it live for the first time.
To me, the Malibu is dominating. I didn't measure it precisely, but it mostly tastes like Malibu to me, which is a
Yeah,
good thing. I don't really want to taste the Jaeger.
yeah, that's not bad.
No, not bad at all. It tastes like a punch.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting because so Surfer on Acid. I thought that was interesting because this film was filmed in the '60s,
Hmm.
so kind of the height of the LSD introduction, and
But these
you
guys
got a
seem
bunch.
so clean cut, don't they?
But I think everybody did. I
Yeah.
think everybody
Yeah.
did, but because there was such a stigma to not looking clean cut, even you might go to the beach and smoke your devil weed and
Hmm.
and stuff like that, but you still looked like the all American
They
kid.
don't really, I don't, I feel like there's not a single reference to getting beers after going surfing or anything, nothing like that in the entire thing. There's
Mm-mm.
the one guy goes home with a girl and they play that for big laughs. Like that's
Yeah,
so, but that I don't even know if that's what was implied there was
right.
something nefarious. That was about it. And speaking of clean cut, I think it's pretty hilarious that you had to wear a suit when you go on a
Yes.
plane.
Yeah, that's something I was going to mention. I want to point out. So let's just talk about travel. Okay, so that the basics we've talked about the basics of the movie. It's they're going around the world and surfing and frozen in time. So some things that what makes this such a great time capsule are things like travel. So you
Mhm.
mentioned being able to take a jet versus a prop plane. So that's a big deal. I think it would
Mhm.
still take probably, I just looked it up. So currently, right now, today's technology, it's a 13 hours airtime from New York to Dakar.
Really?
Yes, right now. I'm assuming back then it was probably more like 15, 16, maybe something like that, a little bit
I have no
longer.
idea. I don't know how the technology in the planes themselves has changed since then, since we got jet planes. I
Those got, I
don't know.
mean, you'd think a jet is a jet, but surely it wasn't as luxurious as nowadays. I think, our air travel is crap compared to what they had. They probably had
Well, it
real
depends on it
food
depends
on
on
dishes,
they probably had real food. They could only hire beautiful women to be stewardesses, things
right?
like that.
Right.
But they did crash way, way more often than they do today.
Well,
That's
you
one
have
big
trade-offs.
advantage.
You have trade-offs and everything, Dave.
You have trade-offs. That's right. You do have
And I don't know. I would be willing to risk it for like a steak on an actual plate, maybe, and not
Mhm.
having somebody's stinky bare feet poking through the armrest or
That's
something
yeah.
like that.
That's but it's kind of remarkable because I looked at the price, right? These
Mhm.
guys paid, did you see how much they paid for their around the world tickets?
Yes.
It's $1,400 in 1964 dollars.
Yeah. Right.
That's a lot of money.
That was a lot of money. That's why they
Well,
had to. That's why he had to gather up the funds to do this.
a
But what's
basic a
funny?
basic a basic round the world ticket today costs about twice that much.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
2023 dollars,
So
you could get one for $3,000 or $4,000. That's a big difference in how much it
yes.
costs
Yeah. So it's
in real terms.
yeah, no, we've come a long way. I mean, it's just like anything else. I mean, you drive the price down by through popularity,
Hmm. Yeah.
and frequent use. So at that time, you think about all the countries they went to, I would say it's a safe bet that none of them had airlines except for the US. Even Australia probably didn't have like Qantas. No, Qantas existed, but I don't know if they had jets, maybe. But
That is
now
a
we
really
have,
good question. Yeah, I don't know. You would have
but
people have probably been flying around Australia because it's so big since
yeah.
the airport was
Well,
invented. So
I
yeah.
know they did have Qantas because Qantas
Okay.
was flying like Australia to England. I mean, it was colony at the time. So, but I don't think New Zealand Air might not have existed.
Don't know.
But I'm just saying that there, it wasn't frequent to, and I'm sure I'm sure they didn't have a flight every day. It was maybe like once every couple of weeks that flight would come up or something like that. That was and then wearing a suit. Yeah, they're both dressed in suits for the flight. And every flight they went on, they're dressed in a suit. I thought that was fantastic.
I think that's wild. Yeah.
I would love to see more of that. I really would. Less flip flops and
Crocs and pajama
Crocs.
pants and stuff. Although I
Yeah.
have to say, if there's one time you want to be comfortable in wearing Crocs and pajama pants, like being on a plane is probably one of those times. I don't know if
Yeah, but it just takes the dignity out of so much. I mean, it's like, what's funny? We used to talk about the people of Walmart, like videos, and we don't anymore, because the people of Walmart has become the people of the world. It's become everywhere you go, you see these people with slippers and pajamas, and you're like, and you go on a flight, you see them too, and you're like, what? They say that the problem with flights is they've become too cheap. So they become like,
I was gonna say, yeah, it's some of the Walmart crowd.
Yeah,
there's the intersection of that Venn diagram has gotten bigger. Let's just say,
and not to sound like an elitist, but there is a difference. I think there's a set of people that wear pajama bottoms and another set that doesn't.
I don't want to sound
bottoms.
like an elitist when it comes to Walmart. I was definitely a frequent Walmart shopper when I lived in Las Cruces. I shopped at Walmart sometimes more than once a day because it was right next to my house and I needed things. But we don't have one. To my knowledge, I think there may be a Walmart like out in Brooklyn or something. So I mean, I haven't been to Walmart since we moved out here, but it's not because I consider myself above Walmart. Let's just say it's because it's no longer right next door.
Also, the just how developed things are or have become, and not always in a good way, but certain things like the remoteness of like Australia. Australia was never considered a developing country. It's always considered part of the first world, and yet they have gravel roads and so forth. But Australia was really rural. I mean, the entire country was, and they were surfing on the west coast, which was, if I remember correctly,
did they start in Perth or did they go to Adelaide?
Yeah, one of those two. But
okay,
I can't remember exactly the statistic, but they're further away from their capital of Sydney than they are from like Hong Kong or something ridiculous. It's like
that's the most isolated big city in the world. They say Perth. It's a big city. I mean, it's 1 million or 2 million people, but there's nothing. I mean, Adelaide, I think, is 1,000 miles away or something like that. I mean,
right. Yeah, there's just nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm taking up all the airtime. What are some things that you noted or liked?
Well, so we're talking about jet travel being a new thing, but it's also surfing, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That's a good point.
So there's like they're explaining what a wipeout is, and to me, I think wipeout is almost a term that today we don't even remember as a surfing term. I mean, I think we do if we think about it for a minute, but it seems like, oh, you wiped out, like you fell down. People would say the guy just wiped out, and maybe not even know that it has anything to do with surfing. Right. What would the etymology of that's a weird wipe out? I bet it's from another language. I bet it sounds like something in Hawaiian. I bet that's where that comes from. Because why is like a sound they have in their words there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking it probably is. I want to look that up at some point. There were other words like that. Like there were ones that I didn't know actually, like the rip. And when you're trying to figure out what the waves are like in a certain place, it's called getting wired. You get wired.
Getting it wired. Yeah.
So there was some slang that is cool. Like I get what they mean. It seems like a useful word, but didn't really catch on in broader. But wipeout, I think, is definitely a word in the English
for
language.
sure.
So
I think the rip. I mean, I've certainly heard that before. That's a common term
in surfing. No, we don't use it like in regular speech. I mean, have you? That's a good question. Have you surfed a lot? Is that like a part of?
I've never surfed before in my life. I've always wanted to, but
I did actually try it one time.
Ainsley had lessons, and she did pretty good. But we were off doing something else while she was doing lessons. So I would like to. I mean, the next time we go to somewhere with warmer water that has a surf, I think I might try. I say warmer water because we get to the California coast maybe once or twice a year, and it's just too doggone cold. I can't do that.
Would you like the water to be 91 degrees like it was in Lagos? Because I feel like it's getting close to maybe cooking you if you're in that water. That's
a bit warm.
I don't know if I've ever been in. That's like the baby pool is probably 91 degrees.
Right.
Like that's really warm.
He makes a point when they're talking about Hawaii early in the film. He said, temperature of the air, 75 degrees. Temperature of the water, 75 degrees.
Yeah, Hawaii's pretty ideal in a lot of ways, right? It probably was a
Yeah.
lot cooler when there were less people there. I bet Hawaii was just an amazing place to go
Yeah.
back in the 50s and 60s.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like that. If you go to Kona, the Kona area,
Hmm.
which I did in
I've been
September
there.
or whatever, wherever, and well, then there weren't a lot of people there. It was
No,
pretty
no.
sparsely.
No,
Uh,
the Big Island's a lot more like rural, like you said. Like
yeah,
there's
yeah, it
small
really
towns
is.
basically. There's really not any
Yeah,
big cities there. There's a few places where you can go, but not really a whole lot of population there.
I preferred the Big Island,
I did
frankly.
too. I had a much better time. I mean, we liked Oahu was nice. We went there. Kauai was really nice
yeah,
in a different sort of way. But Oahu was just kind of, I don't know, it just looked like anywhere else, really, in a lot of ways. It's pretty. I mean, there's still the mountains and things like that, and
yeah,
the beach was really. We went to Waikiki. Oh my God,
yeah,
yeah, Waikiki.
yeah.
They have a really at first. So I didn't really know anything about this movie going in. When I just turned it on, I looked it up and put it on and just watched it. So the way he was talking for the first 20 minutes, I thought it was just old timey corny.
Hmm.
And then about 20 or 30 minutes in, I got it. Like I got
Hmm.
what they're going for as the joke, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Hmm.
Like talking that way as a joke, not really
Right.
talking that way. And that
Yeah.
that made it I started enjoying it a lot more. The sense of humor made more it's very dry.
Very
And it
dry. Yeah.
took me a little bit to catch on to it with that.
Yeah. I like that it was, like I said, completely homegrown. He would show this or parts of the film, like he would take it sort of on traveling and put on basically a show, and he would actually narrate it on the spot. So he'd show
Hmm.
his videos, narrate it on the spot, and have a tape player that would actually play the surf music, right?
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't until he got everything edited and ready that he kind of put it all together. But I thought that was really interesting that like he didn't write all this stuff out, and it makes sense. Like when you watch it, if you were to sort of write that dialogue, it's nice because there are certain areas where he doesn't say a thing for a good bit, right?
Hmm.
There'll be
Yeah.
this kind of pause, and then he'll say something silly about something or just add a note of detail.
A dad joke of some kind.
Yeah, dad joke, right? I think if you were though to write, you'd have too much dialogue. You would just be
Hmm.
narrating everything, and he just because he was used to like I can imagine him standing at the back while everybody's watching, and then him kind of doing the voice narration,
Yeah, yeah.
including
Yeah.
the corny jokes and stuff. I'm like, oh, that makes total sense after I
Right.
found that out. You know?
And you do it 100 times, and maybe once every 3 times you think of like a new funny quip, and
Yeah,
people
right.
act. So yeah, I thought of it the way that they did that. It reminded me of I think we've talked about this before, but the way that the Beatles played 10,000 hours of shows in the
Yeah,
clubs in Dresden and places like that, and literally just how do people react? We like that thing, keep that thing. How do people
yeah,
react to that? Not so well, don't keep that. It's like
yeah,
actually
right.
workshopping it in front of an audience
Yes,
and then getting a feel for what works and keeping it. And I think it shows because it gets you
right,
through. I don't think that this guy's like a great comedic writer or anything,
right, right,
but I think he put together, 50 of his best quips that he'd made over 6 years of taking this thing around.
right.
I think he said 6 years that they were driving around and showing it to various small audiences.
Yeah, no, it took him a long time.
I saw an interview with him. Was it with him or with his son? I don't remember. It was one of them, either Bruce Brown or his
Brown,
son.
huh?
And he was saying that they had a rule at first not to go anywhere that was more than 10 miles from the ocean because that was
Uh-huh.
where people would be interested.
Right.
And he was sitting there thinking about it. It wasn't him. It was the guy that he got to actually help distribute it. But he was talking, that guy was he looked at the map and he looked at Wichita, Kansas on the map. And he was saying, that's about as far from being 10 miles from the coast as you could possibly go. And so he booked a theater in Wichita for a week and went there and showed it. And it was just, the house was packed,
Yeah.
for the whole week. And they ended up keeping it there for several years and like for a long time in the theater.
Yeah.
And I think that was sort of where their big theater run started, was from doing that sort of thing. It kind of grew out of
Yeah.
that.
Their big one was in New York, actually New York City. He had a 48-week run at a
Yeah, Kips
theater.
Bay.
Yeah. And
Which I don't know. I don't know if the Kips Bay Theater is still there, but I know where Kips Bay is.
it was so Wichita was actually Bruce Brown. He didn't have a distributor yet. So it was Brown himself
Okay.
did Wichita as a test.
Mm-hmm.
He tried it there and people loved it. He still couldn't get any distributors for it. And so he's like, okay. So he rented out this theater. Like he rented a screen himself. And he's like, I'm going to show it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it like just took off. And then finally distributors looked at it and they said, oh, okay, well maybe, this thing would work. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take it. And the distributor that he picked was the one that said, leave it as is. Like all these other distributors wanted him to make changes, including to the poster, which has now become iconic. This shows how much these people know, right? Because they wanted to change the poster. Well, that poster, the iconic The Endless Summer poster, is now in the American Museum of History. I mean, it's considered cool. It's considered like pop culture, pop art history, because it's so iconic, you know, with that neon pink horizon and the brilliant, you know, yellow sun and stuff.
Yeah, it's a cool looking poster. I like it a lot.
Yeah, but so the distributor that he chose was the one that said, you know what, leave everything as is. We won't mess with the poster. We won't mess with the movie. Just leave it. And he's like, all right, you're the guy then.
It reminded me. I was trying to think if I knew anything that it's sort of obviously videos develop like that on the internet now all the time. Somebody posts it and it goes viral. But before that, in my lifetime, when I was thinking, it doesn't really apply to Blair Witch Project, right? They released that in big theaters. It did have kind of a viral marketing campaign.
They tried to.
But what I was thinking that was kind of like that was South Park, because I remember South Park, the tape was getting copied and sent to like clubs and bars all over the country, and people were watching that first short. And I remember seeing it at a club in DC and being like, what is this like construction paper cartoon thing?
Is that Jesus versus Santa Claus?
I don't even know what it was. I just saw it in the distance on the TV and I was like, what the heck is that? And then like a couple months later, it was on Comedy Central.
Right.
And I was thinking that probably is how this would have gotten around the country, because back then you couldn't do videotapes, right? You didn't have cheap videotapes to copy and send all over. You actually had to reel to reel.
Yeah.
That must have been difficult to reproduce, or at least expensive. This is about as viral as something could be in 1964. Was it 64?
64 is, well, 64 is when it was released in the theaters. Yeah. You had such limited content, even up in the 70s when I was a kid. I mean, like if there was a movie that featured something that you liked, you made sure to watch it, you know, because, you know, you didn't have, now it's like, as you know, there are channels devoted to, you know, the most niche thing that you can imagine. Like, let's say repairing Timexes probably has its very own, like Timexes from like 1950 to 1958. Like,
absolutely,
like it probably has its own YouTube channel just for that, right?
Yeah.
But back then it was like something came out and you're like, oh wow, I love to surf, or I want to know about surfing, or I'm really interested in this thing, you know?
Absolutely. I don't think a kid today could understand how little content there was out there. Like I remember being a little kid and being really into dinosaurs and just not being able to come by images of dinosaurs whenever I wanted to.
Yes.
So knowing I'd go over to somebody's house and I knew they had a book that had a picture of a dinosaur in it, and I'd go hunt that book down and flip to that page and just, you know.
If we wanted to see dinosaurs, we had to watch those stupid clay dinosaurs on Land of the Lost.
Claymation, there was a claymation one. Yeah. They played. I remember exactly the movie you're talking about, and they would play it at the library in our town once every couple of months. And I would go. I would make my mom take me to the library so I could sit and watch the dinosaur video.
I remember the dinosaurs trying to get the cavemen, like they're literally in the cave. Let's not worry about humans and dinosaurs living at the same time, but humans are in the cave, the cavemen, and then the dinosaur are trying to get them. They're just so bad. We didn't have a lot, and so what we had though, it was like when I was a kid. I didn't have a lot of toys. My kids don't understand that at all because they've got literally boxes full. But I remember, I would get Hot Wheels. You look at my Hot Wheels from when I was a kid. I think I still have them, and they are beat to hell. I mean, they're scratched up, everything else, because those are the only Hot Wheels I had. Now they cost 90 cents, right? Mm-hmm. Back then they were like $2 or something, and that was a lot of money back then. So I would get like one Hot Wheel and then just play the crap out of that one Hot Wheel all the time. I would jump it. I would drop it off the ceiling or off the wall. I mean, just all kinds of crap. And so you look at them now and they're beat up, but that's because I played with those like crazy. And it was the same with content. You would get one movie about surfing, and that's all you're going to get is one movie about surfing.
Right.
So you watch that movie over and over and over. You memorize that one movie.
People wonder how something like the Star Wars holiday special could have ever happened. How could something that bad have ever happened, right? But it was because you had a whole generation of kids that saw Star Wars in the theater, and there's no Star Wars content available. Right. For 3 years.
There's nothing. There's nothing.
I don't think anybody today could imagine having to wait 3 years for anything.
Yeah. Well, even like, yeah, because even like Lord of the Rings, they made all three movies at one time and released them once every
and also,
year. For
you
3
could go
years.
and watch the first movie immediately. Came out on DVD
Yeah.
like a
Oh,
couple
that's
months
true.
later.
That's a
You
good
could
point.
just start watching it over
or
and
even
over again at
VHS
home,
before that. So
yeah,
yeah, it
completely
was
different.
totally different. I remember this girl went to my school. This is in the 70s, and her
Mhm.
dad was a doctor. And because they're a doctor, they did a lot better than we were doing. She had a projector,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
her dad had bought Disney movies on
Nice.
reel to reel. Like he bought
Nice.
the film, and it was like the projector that you would have at school.
Mhm.
But they would have like sleepovers with the girls. They would have a sleepover, and they'd watch a Disney movie. And I'm like, you watched a Disney movie in your house?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They're like, yeah,
Yep.
like on a movie screen with a movie
Yeah.
projector.
Yeah.
What? You know?
It's like if somebody told you they had been to the moon last week or something. Or
Yeah,
make about
exactly. Yeah,
my dad used to
yeah,
take me to the theater to go see old Disney movies when they were
yeah.
re-released. Like I remember
Same
seeing,
here. Yeah,
I don't know, Aristocats or something just
yeah,
came out
exactly.
in the
Yeah,
theater. I went to
yeah,
go see
yeah.
it when I was a kid. It was a big
Jaron
deal.
was my son was blown away by the fact that, like, I think Robin Hood, the Disney movie Robin Hood, came out in the 60s probably. But I
Mm-hmm.
saw it in the theaters. I saw it like in 1984 or 1983 or something
Yep.
like that in the theater.
Yeah, I
And
did
he's
too.
like,
I
"What?"
did too.
He
Yeah.
thought that was crazy.
Yeah.
But
They used to re-release movies.
he
Crazy,
does
but
he does sort of think I'm pretty cool because I got to see all the Star Wars and Indiana Jones first run in the theater.
yeah.
So that makes me pretty cool.
I saw them all except for Temple of Doom. My parents wouldn't take me to see Temple of Doom.
What?
They decided it was
What?
too scary for kids. And
What? Oh my
I
gosh.
was like 6 when that movie came out, so they
That one had
decided
a bad that one did get a bad reputation, I'll say
it
that.
had a
But
bad reputation.
but
Exactly.
that's why you wanted to go see it as a kid. You had to see it. If you didn't see it, you were
Hmm.
square, man. I think there's a lot that explains the virology, I guess we could say, of the I don't want to say virility because that's something totally different.
Hmm.
Virology of the of this particular movie. The documentary, I think, being truthful, being exotic, but also just being, content being really scarce on
But
certain
also,
things.
but also surfing, I think, is like skiing. And people who are into it are really obsessed with it. When I lived in Boulder, I remember my friends were like, we're all going out to this bar. Some guy who I've never heard of, some famous skier, has a new video and everybody wants to watch his videos. And I was like, you're gonna go out to watch somebody's skiing videos? I was like, there's nothing in the world I would less want to do than watch somebody. But it turns out when you watch it, it's actually pretty mesmerizing and interesting. Once you force yourself to sit down and watch it, it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
They had
yeah.
these videos of guys getting dropped out of helicopters, and just
Mhm.
skiing down completely
Right.
explored tops of mountains and stuff, which to me seems like suicide, but
Yeah, that's
it's
true. I mean,
very entertaining to watch it actually.
if you're into that stuff, then you're really into it,
Yeah,
and you sort of
exactly.
want to see it. But something else, though, I just looked it up. So that, Beach Boys surfing their very first song was 1961.
Okay. So
So
the surfing craze is kind of big at the time, right?
yeah, so I think he got in there at the right time. He predates them, obviously, because his first one came out, I think, 58 or something like that, or maybe 56.
Mm-hmm.
It was in like the mid to late mid 50s. So he was sort of already there when the surfing craze sort of caught up to him. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he was in a really good spot. Here he is, a guy that does surf himself. He knows how to surf, and he also knows how to make these movies, and he's interested in making these movies.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be stupid not to, right? I mean, that's just one and one makes two type of math. But he sort of got there when the Beach Boys took off because their first, let's see, their first number one hit, Beach
It might have been.
Boys.
I think it might have been in the late 50s, right? Did they have a song in like 1959 or something?
1961 was their first song.
61 is their first song.
Uh,
Okay. But yeah, I mean, there's
let's see.
definitely, and like we said, there's those beach movies, right? You got all those Disney beach movies, basically. I think they're Disney movies
So
anyway.
in
That's when it showed them.
January 1963, their first top 10 single was Surfin' USA.
Yeah.
63. This came out in
Oh, yeah.
64.
Yeah.
In May 64, the same year that this movie came out, I Get Around was one of their first number one. Their first hit was I Get Around in 1964. So the Beach Boys were like right there. Surfing Safari was 1963. I
Yeah.
mean, it's in the zeitgeist, as they say, right?
Exactly.
Um,
I was gonna say there was something in the water apparently, but I guess
yeah,
that's zeitgeist is probably a smarter way of saying that. Yeah. It's definitely a moment for surfing for sure. I mean, people wouldn't have seen it before that. It would have been, we talked about Mark Twain observed people surfing when he was in
In
Hawaii in the
Hawaii, yeah,
1800s.
right.
I mean, it was happening. It was a thing, but it definitely had a moment in the 50s and early 60s, I guess.
Yeah. And I think there's part of that. You're talking about the baby boomers that were really into it. And there's probably a lot that goes with it. I'm sure sociologists have broken this down,
Mm-hmm.
10 ways from Sunday, if that's how the expression goes. But there's things like
six ways from
Sunday. Yeah.
I think that's how I would.
But you have the rise in disposable income. You've got the rise in travel where people are actually able to. You've got America is on top, and the rest of the world is sort of looking up to the U.S.
Right, right. Half of the world is as undeveloped as Ghana, and the other half is just recovering from the war.
Right, just recovering, and we made all the money because we were untouched, and we developed everything, and everybody owes us money. So we're like premier empire at that time, sort of the start of our empire, I guess. And now you have all these kids that, like I said, had disposable income. I think the Mustang comes out in 1965, right? And the Mustang was specifically targeting baby boomer kids who had money, who had, wanted freedom. They wanted to go places. So this movie really taps into all of that. And there's a little bit of you saw the beatniks. We talked about that with On the Road in the 50s. You had the beatniks. In 67 would be the summer of love. So the hippies are about to take over, right? But you've got the rebellion is starting. So the boomers are starting to rebel against their square World War II generation parents, right? And surfing is a little bit there. It's a little bit of something that,
like, just the fact of surfing would have been a rebellion. Like doing something, I guess something that's just kind of recreational or something like that. I mean, you don't learn to surf by going to the beach once a month. You learn to surf by hanging out at the beach every single day.
It's a life, right? It's a life.
That's not how the greatest generation, I think, saw themselves.
Right. That's exactly right.
People who hang out
you mentioned it. I mean, Brown wanted to create a movie to show his parents or his mom because she didn't understand what he was doing.
Yep.
But something else you mentioned that I want to touch on. You mentioned how these guys were all dressed up for their flights, right? They're all dressed up, but do you remember, like, as soon as they get in the ocean, when their hair would get wet? Do you remember how long their hair was? Like,
short.
No, it wasn't. The blonde guy had like it was slicked back.
Oh,
he had hippie hair, kind of like the Beatles, like the Mods, but they just slicked it back.
Yeah, so I hear people refer to the Beatles as long-haired, and I know. From having seen the actual hippies later in the decade, I'm like, what are you talking about? They're mildly long hair,
This is like beatniks are sort of known for being unkempt and having long hair and stuff, but like you've seen what the beatniks look like, and they didn't really have long hair. They just, to us, they had normal hair, but to the World War II generation, squared off and everything else. Yeah, I mean they had long hair. So
the guys who were in mission in the control room in the movie Apollo 13. That's what you're supposed to look like. Those
yes, exactly.
That's one thing we talked about a little bit. We talked about like how it's also sort of a travel log. I mean, not just sort of, totally also a travel log.
Yeah,
I thought one of the coolest parts of it was actually when they were inland. And they were in South Africa, and they did the road trip from Cape Town to Durban.
I thought so too. Yeah, that was cool.
I was thinking, oh my god, that would be amazing. Could you do? I don't even know if that would be safe today
on a dirt road.
Yeah,
basically dirt roads.
I'm pretty sure there'd be paved roads to go across the country, but with South Africa these days, I just don't know if that would be. I don't know. I could ask somebody, but that doesn't sound like it would be safe to me.
What would not be safe? Are you talking about militants?
I think in some parts of South Africa, there's like a really high crime rate, and like you might run into bandits.
Yeah. See, I don't know if that
I'm exaggerating.
I don't know if that existed back then because
well, there was the apartheid state was making sure nobody was doing anything.
Well, not even that though. I mean, you go to rural parts of just continental Africa, people don't have guns. They don't have the means to do that. I don't know. Maybe there was a different morality at that time too that has also completely shifted.
The Africa you're seeing, this is just a surface level impression for me, obviously. The Africa you're seeing in 1964 is still pretty much colonial.
Yeah.
And most of what we associate with modern Africa is post-colonial, right? It's like, like you said, the spread of the weaponry is all the revolutionaries getting weapons, and then the communists supporting one side and us supporting the other side, and then the complete breakdown of authority and warlordism and stuff like that. And it's essentially it's like the growing pains of people actually governing themselves and not being. These guys are benefiting from a really nice time when there's these, colonial overlords telling people what to do. So it seems very peaceful, I'm sure, but clearly it's rooted in pretty nasty oppression. Like they went through Leopoldville on their flight. Apparently, we didn't see it in the movie because there's no surfing there, but they went through there, and that's named after a guy who's responsible for murdering like 5 million Congolese people.
Yeah, it was pretty terrible. Yeah.
So
this is Heart of Darkness is written about him.
Fact, Heart of Darkness. I think it's in the Congo, but I don't know if it's. I can't remember whether. I think it's during
his. I think it's during his reign. I think it's what he did to get. Was it rubber? Was it rubber tree? Was it rubber? Yeah, no, totally. I mean, had they gone to India, we would have seen colonial India, at the time, and so forth. So I guess the only one I really don't feel bad. There are only two I don't feel really bad about were New Zealand and Australia. Right. But I do sort of feel bad about watching it and so forth.
The trip across. I can't remember if they go across the North Island or the South Island, but they took another road trip over the island to get to a beach that was on the I guess it would be the east shore of the island, and they go over the mountains and they go fishing in the streams and stuff. I was like, that's so cool. I would read a whole book about road tripping through New Zealand.
New Zealand really at that time. Yeah, that was amazing. That was
not something you hear a lot about. So,
and I guess that's one of the things about it. Like when you look at it, when you have a travel log like that, is it's like totally unspoiled, right? We think of unspoiled by it's a completely selfish notion. It just means that nobody else has ruined it for me, right? So I can go there and ruin it,
right?
And and it's one of those things that we don't want anybody to go there, so don't tell anybody because I want to go there, and I don't want it to be messed up when I go, so nobody else can go.
That's my national park philosophy. My favorite national parks are the ones that I'm the only guy that goes there. I love those parks.
Right.
When I go to Yellowstone or Yosemite, I'm like, can I just leave? This is
horrible. This is tourist central.
There's all these Walmart people thronging Yellowstone. I just really wish I was by myself. But it belongs to us all. It's the national park belongs to the people. So
that's right.
Unfortunately, the people are going to show up with their cargo ships. And worse, the motorcycles. That was the last time I went to Yellowstone. It was at the same time as the Sturgis rally, and it's a pretty easy drive from Sturgis and it was just broom, broom all through the park constantly. And they're also obnoxious. They were all like drunk and stuff while you're walking around looking at the geysers and just not a lot of fun. But
I'm with you. Well, you're a national park nerd, so we'll just leave it at that.
Definitely a national park nerd. That is true. So they dealt with a lot of. I think one of the parts that really stuck in my head was that visit to Ghana when they go to the beach and they're sort of people there had never seen a surfboard before in their life, and so they're showing them how to surf, and some of the kids start getting on them and surfing. And I thought for a second it was going to be like that sequence in Airplane. I thought it was going to be like they showed the guys, the Africans what a surfboard was, and then they were going to be doing twists and flips with them immediately.
Right.
It was not bad. It was very much actually what you would expect. They could get up and stand on them, and that was about it. And they were pretty impressed watching the guys surf.
But then when they left, kids were body surfing. They'd found said they're disassembling their houses, but it was like a plank of wood that they started body surfing, and it was body surfing Ghana.
That's pretty good. I don't know if we're ready. Do you think we're far enough in to do the biggest surprise? Because mine's kind of about that, actually.
I think so. We're getting there. Go for it.
So this is my biggest surprise. I just kind of looked up on YouTube. Was there anything follow-ups to the Endless Summer? Any interesting videos? And there was one guy watched this video, and he went back to the town where they filmed the sequence in Ghana, visited that beach, and went around talking to people to try to find was there anybody left who was around back in those days.
That's cool.
He said the average life expectancy in Ghana is 65. So everybody he talked to was like, oh no, everybody who was there would be dead.
Oh my gosh.
But so they're going through and they're showing the video to some of the people, and there's a close up of a young man, and he's called the head rope coiler. And he's like doing the nets with everybody.
I remember that. Yeah. I just watched it.
And everybody said, oh yeah, that's this guy. He's still alive. He lives down the block. You can go see him. So they walked like 3 blocks and they interviewed this guy. And they're like, yeah, there's this video. And he's like, what video? And they're like, here. And they show it to him. And he's like, oh my God, I haven't seen a picture of this guy and this guy. All these people are dead. And he couldn't believe he could see all these people. and he hadn't seen himself when he was 16 or whatever he was in that picture since then. It was a really interesting interview because he was talking about, so the village is called Labadi, but it's still there. And he said they actually tried to do surfing because they asked, did you, he said, oh yeah, I remember that day. Everybody tried to surf for like a couple of weeks, but we couldn't get it to work. We kept using boards that were too small. We couldn't get any pieces of wood that were long enough to surf. And eventually everybody just gave up on it. And it was really sad because then they did like a pullback shot and they showed this town that nobody goes on the water anymore. It's all filled with garbage because it's essentially become this like terrible, slum outlying settlement around Accra. And it's just, which is a huge city today, millions of people there in the 21st century. It was neat to see his reaction to seeing himself as a young person, but it was also really sad. And that's where I got that thought of just the change in Africa over those years.
Yeah.
Which I've never been there, so I'm not the best person to comment on it. But
there's a lot that we can do with that. I mean, you can talk about. There's actually a book called, I think it's called "The Case for Colonialism," and it's I
want to go on the record as saying that is not the argument that I'm making. I think it's great.
No. I'm not saying you are. No, it's a professor. I can't remember. He's somewhere on the West Coast, but he's a professor of either history or sociology, something like that. And he talks about, and he just gives bare statistics on things, but it's a wealth of things. And I'm not saying it's not problematic, and I'm not saying that it's not terrible in a lot of ways, but he gives just on paper, and he actually uses, he doesn't use, strangely enough, he doesn't use Leopold and was it the Dutch? He doesn't use it.
Not in the argument for colonialism.
He doesn't use the Dutch as overlords. He uses Germans in Africa, like whatever colonies they had there. It's interesting, and I mean, you can think about we can go down a whole road. I mean, because we can talk about, England was a colony at one time, and then they became colonists themselves. I mean, they were a colony of Rome, right? Part of the Roman Empire. And,
they were a colony of Rome, and then they were a colony of the Saxons, and before Rome, they were probably a colony of whoever those people were that knocked out the ones before them, and
and just on and on and on.
To some extent, that's always going on.
So, in any case, moving on. I think that's. What do we do with your surprise? Because that was really profound and sad. So let's not end on your surprise.
Well, there is a posit. There was a posit. They went an hour or two farther down the coast from, it's called Labadi, and there is a place called Busua Beach that is a nice beach, and there's a surfing community there. And there was a video. He took videos of the guy who's the Ghanaian surfing champion, who was like amazing. You watch, this guy was doing spins on the board and stuff. Really, really amazing surfer.
Cool.
And was a native Ghanaian, like he was from there and was and representing the country. So that was pretty cool. I
have a really good friend from Ghana, and a lot of my students are from Ghana.
Yeah, I bet that's true. Yeah.
It's an amazing culture. I would love to go to Ghana someday, but it's sad to see a lot of this rampant overpopulation, over industrialization, and it's no fault of theirs. It's just sort of, it's what happens when, I guess, when colonialism ends, it ends abruptly, and there's no, it's like what they said about Vietnam veterans. Why were so many Vietnam veterans like racked with PTSD and so forth? Why did it affect them? So, and it's because typically, like World War II, they had time to decompress. Like they brought them back to the States. They didn't just turn them back on the streets.
That's an interesting.
After
theory.
Fighting, they did something else, and they were still in the army, and they did something else. And a lot of those guys in World War II didn't go home until well after the war.
Yeah, but not even, because it's not even just what you do after. It's literally, probably physically, it took you 12 hours to get back from Vietnam to America. Yeah. And then you were just in America without any.
And what they would do is once your year was over, you were done. You're back out on the street. So, a week ago, you're in the jungle, trying not to step on a landmine, trying not to get shot, seeing somebody die in front of you. And then now you're on a street, in Detroit or something. It's like, how do you expect these guys to act?
My grandfather's unit, when they came back from World War II, they took ships. They were on transport ships back.
Right. And so it took them
probably they fought in Europe. The war ended. They probably had some occupation duties to kind of wind down a little bit. And then it was weeks going across the Atlantic, or a week or two. I don't know how long it takes, but that was actually he said,
so they could sort of work some stuff out. And the problem with a lot of the colonial powers is once they left. We did that to Afghanistan. I mean, that's exactly what we did. We're like, all right, see ya. You're on your own. Take care. And they're like, what? Next thing you know,
Well, I think
ISIS or
Afghanistan.
whoever overruns it. But I mean, but
I
that's what
think
a lot of these.
Afghanistan's a little bit complicated because honestly, I think we were there about 18 years too long after our job was done. So I think
Well, I'm not saying
them some time.
it's
We gave them
there's
some
not a lot of
time.
other things, but I'm just using that as an analogy, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, the English transfer of power in Jamaica took years, and then
we
they
learned about it
transferred
with Dr. No. Dr.
We
No.
did, but they transferred the power, and Jamaica is a really stable country, as was Hong Kong before.
Well, Ghana is
you know,
actually Ghana's a really good case because Ghana is actually pretty stable. The government of Ghana is a pretty stable, but it's just I think this rapid industrialization, and people just moving from being a rural, I don't know what the correct, third world country is what they used to call it, being that to being
developing. They call it developing country.
Well, but before it was developing is what I'm saying. Before it was just like a rural place and it was living in the 1700s to some extent.
Yeah.
And then they got independence and they've moved all the way from that to, it's probably kind of like if you went to visit 1910s America and you saw the piles of garbage everywhere.
Right. Exactly.
Eventually people in Ghana are probably going to start learning to take care of things.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. They just have to sort of grow into their democracy and freedom and so forth. Yeah. Well, my biggest surprise was just I didn't realize. Okay, I never knew the backstory insofar as making this, other than he filmed these guys going around the world for a year. But then after he filmed going around the world for a year, he took 2 years. He went on the road, and he sort of workshopped this, like you said. He would do an on-site narration, nothing written down. He's like, oh, there's so-and-so. He's riding this great wave, blah, blah, blah. And so he said that, for 20 shows. So when he did the narration, he just did the same audio that he would do for the narration, right? I thought that was cool. And just the whole idea. I mean, I love the concept of bootstrapping a project. That's what I've always done. 90% of the time they don't turn out, but 10% of the time they do. And when they do, it's such a great story because, it just feels so good that Disney didn't make this. Disney didn't say, I've got $5 million. Let's go around the world and follow some guys surfing. And while we're at it, okay, put a fake iceberg over there. We'll put a couple of penguins over here. No, it was just a guy with a camera and a tripod that you saw in every scene. What's carrying the tripod.
It's funny you said Disney because it just popped into my head that it reminds me of the Jungle Cruise, where you go around.
Yeah,
and the guy's got like one dorky joke for every single thing that you pass. And they've been workshopping those jokes for 50 years.
And now the backside of water.
Backside, he'll trade you 10 of his heads for one of yours.
One of yours. That's right.
But yeah, it's a shame because nobody would ever make a movie like this today, or they would, but it would go on YouTube, which thank God
go on YouTube
because that actually does give people some.
Right.
You can do some kind of guerrilla filming and things like that.
And I think if you were to do something, sometimes on YouTube, something like this would hit. And I think, people make documentaries for YouTube. My son watched a whole. Gosh, he's so into theme parks. This guy made like a 45-minute documentary for YouTube on something just so obscure about some theme park that shut down and why it shut down and the backstory. And Jaron watched this.
Was it that one in Maryland by any chance? There's a really famous one, the Forbidden Forest or the Enchanted Forest.
No, it was something that Disney tried and it failed at. And so I don't know. He is really into theme parks, but he watched this with rapt attention, for 45 minutes. And like I said, you could do a documentary on Timex watches from 1952. And maybe even like a specific type. And you could make an hour-long documentary, and there would be people that would watch it.
People would watch
because there are people into that. The story of this in an analog world where this blew up, made $25 million on a $50,000 budget. And this guy, that's all this guy did. This guy did like 3 movies after that, or maybe 2. He did a documentary about motorcycling, which is apparently really good.
I think the motorcycle one was pretty popular, but I don't know.
The motorcycle one is pretty popular. I can't remember the other. He did one more, and that's pretty much all he ever did, And then he became like this, legend in the surfing community. So he did. That's sort of his whole world after that because he had an appearance
on SpongeBob.
Yes, that's right, SpongeBob. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I
he
need to
did
go
have a
back and
little
rewatch that episode. Yeah, I need to go
yeah, I
rewatch
don't
that episode.
remember. We watched all those back in the day when Michelle was little, but I don't remember very well.
That particular, if I remember correctly, that particular episode, I did research on that one because it turned out this one guy was voiced by Johnny Depp, and I was like,
Oh, that's
what?
weird.
Yeah, like
That's
the
really
main guy
weird.
was voiced by Johnny Depp. I
Huh.
thought it was voiced by this famous surfer, but it wasn't.
Well, should we
Okay, so
decide?
that
We'll decide whether we're toasting, I
well,
guess, right?
I think it's your
It's
decision to
my
decide
vote.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you do have to do a little bit of putting yourself in the shoes of people back in history in order to really appreciate this one. I recently listened to a podcast about scuba diving, and they were talking about Jacques Cousteau was not really the person who invented scuba. It did exist before him, but he did this documentary, which was pretty much the first underwater photography anybody had ever seen. And you go back and you watch that, and it's like, it's cool, but it doesn't really blow your mind today. But you try to imagine what would that have been like to see that when that in I don't know, the 50s, I think it was. And if you do that with this, and then you appreciate the viral nature of the campaign and stuff like that, I think this is pretty cool. It's a pretty classic documentary, I'd say. I mean, this, we could probably cast out the Nanook one because it's all BS, or the one where the lemmings were jumping off the cliff, but actually they threw them all off the cliff because
Yeah,
lemmings
that
don't
was so
really do that.
terrible. God.
Yeah. But I would give this one a vote. This was fun to watch. I found, like I said before, it's surprisingly entertaining to watch people just surf. That's not really something I would ever choose to watch, but I watched it and it's actually kind of neat. I could sit here and watch somebody surf for a long time. It's something I don't really know how to do, and it's pretty compelling to watch it happen. So yeah, I think this one gets my vote.
All right, cool. So we're gonna toast it. And,
yeah. Glasses up.
There you go. All
right.
right.
Yeah, we haven't actually done that in a while. It's pretty good. The Jägermeister bottle makes it nice.
It does. It does. Well, cool. Well, that's all that we have for this. Any last words about this? Are you gonna try surfing next time you?
No, I do want to give proper thanks to Old King Neptune before we close the podcast.
Yes.
I think it's important
Old
that we
King
do
Neptune.
that.
Yep.
But yeah, otherwise, I think we're done. I think we'll talk after we end the recording. We'll talk about what we're going to do next time, I think. But
don't give it away. No, this is all organic. We just ESP it.
Okay. Right.
Each other, yeah, as far as they know. All right. Well, cool. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us on yet another edition of Toasting Classics. I am Professor Dr. Clint Lanier.
I thought you said it was assistant professor. Isn't it
assistant professor? Assistant Professor Dr. Clint Lanier. Is it if I say Professor and Doctor in the same line, is that too much?
Professor Doctor? Yeah,
Professor Doctor.
Lawyer, attorney, David McArthur, Esquire.
Yeah. There you go. All right, cool.
Yeah,
thanks for joining us.
And thanks everybody for joining us in Toasting the Classics. Peace out.
Peace.
That's it for episode 90 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, stay tuned to find out what we'll be drinking for our discussion of Kanye West's album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know the strangest place you've ever surfed. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.